You've heard the Honorable Minister Farrakhan deal with this experience. He's stated it before the world several times, where on September 17th, 1985, while in Tepoztlan, Mexico, he had an experience where he was climbing this mountain that he had climbed many times, and then one of these smaller wheels that we call baby planes appeared over the mountain that he was climbing, summoned him up. And long story short, the smaller wheel takes him to a larger wheel. And when he enters this room, he hears the voice of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, a man who the world believed was dead some 10 years prior. But he hears the voice clearly of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who tells him things and gives him instructions. Some of those things that he tells him is about the current president's plans to meet with his Joint Chiefs of Staff to plan a war. And he runs it down to the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, and he tells the minister to hold a press conference and tell the world what he's telling him, and to tell the world that you got it from me, Elijah Muhammad, on the wheel. Oh. Can you imagine the unpopularity of coming before the world, as the Honorable Minister Farrakhan has been doing really since 1981, publicly proclaiming that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is physically alive? And now he has an experience where he hears from his teacher. And his teacher tells him, I want you to go before the world and tell the world you got this information from me, Elijah Muhammad, on the wheel. Very specific. And you know the story. He holds a press conference at the J.W. Marriott, at the seat of America's power in Washington, D.C. And in this press conference, he gives what became known as the Great Announcement, where the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, standing on his teacher's words, goes before the world in an international press conference. I'm sorry, group, can I hear you all say international? See, that means the whole world is supposed to hear what this man is saying. He holds an international press conference at the seat of world power, Washington, D.C., and he runs down his experience. And he ends that experience with this warning to the world, just in case they want to mock him about these wheels. Keep in mind, they were still calling us crazy about these wheels, by the way. This is in the 1980s, before the internet was a thing, before it was widely known that these wheel-shaped planes are real. And the Honorable Minister Farrakhan concluded part of that press conference by stating, before you will be able to establish your mockery of me, if that is what you wish to do, for what was revealed to me in the wheel, you will see these wheels, or what you call UFOs, in abundance over the major cities of America. Now, if any of you know like I know, right after the minister gave this international press conference, the next day and for the next few days, those wheels did exactly what their representative said they were going to do. They were seen over Washington, D.C., they were seen over Baltimore, and eventually they were seen in most of the major cities of America. So much so that the local news in D.C. had to run segments on it for the next few days, trying to figure out what are these objects that are seen in the sky. And even though the Honorable Minister Farrakhan gave an international press conference warning the world specifically as to what they would see, we noticed that on all those news broadcasts, they mentioned nothing, absolutely nothing about the Honorable Minister Farrakhan's words of warning. This is because this topic has become the major topic of a conspiracy of silence. But again, these are incontestable, inarguable pieces of evidence that don't even require interpretation. So the reason, since the minister's representation of this divine power is so obvious, the enemy's only option is to just not talk about it. This is why this topic is the brunt of what's called a conspiracy of silence. Do y'all know what that is? That's basically when a group agrees that they can never talk about a certain topic. And you wonder why, with all their TV shows, with all of their concerns about these so-called UFOs, you wonder why they never call the source of this phenomena. They never talk about the Nation of Islam who introduced this reality to the world. They're supposed to be these top journalists, but the most newsworthy story in the world represented by the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, but you don't even bring him up when it deals with this. They won't even deal with his students, like myself. Look, I can't, even on the local news where I'm from, I'm like, look, I know something about this stuff, y'all. Conspiracy of silence. And just like Elisha of the scriptures, after Elijah leaves, did you all know Elisha had an experience too? That parallels the Honorable Minister Farrakhan's vision-like experience. After the departure of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, some 10 years or so later, his Elisha, his national representative, his second self, that he is fused with, had an experience. Elisha was given privy information as to what was taking place in the king's secret chamber. And he started telling people what was taking place in the king's secret chamber based on what he had got from some unknown source. And then the king found out that there was somebody disturbing their military war plans. And the king was like, who let the word out about what's going on? I said this stuff in private in my Joint Chiefs of Staff's meeting. I said this in private. So then when the king got word that this was this servant Elisha telling the people what was taking place in the king's secret chambers, the king got upset to the point where he sent his whole army to go and capture Elisha. And as the story goes in the second book of Kings, around the 6th chapter, this king sent his army and they went after Elisha with the intention to do harm to him. And it got to a point where the king and his army had Elisha and Elisha's servants surrounded. It looked like it was totally in, like Elisha was totally in for him. And the only thing Elisha could do was rely on the God of Elijah. So all he could do, he started praying, him and his servant, he started praying to the God of Elijah. And the God of Elijah, while he was surrounded by the king's army, all of a sudden some fiery chariots showed up over the mountain. And the king's army were overcome with a blindness, and Elisha was able to walk away unharmed because of a real God. I know somebody like that, y'all. I know a man who serves the true and living God, who is the God of Elijah, that has power in the real world. That is the God we represent in the Nation of Islam. So, brothers and sisters, this is no coincidence. We cannot make this stuff up. We can't make this up at all. And don't you know, when the Honorable Minister Farrakhan explained to the world what took place in his More Than a Vision experience about Reagan, President Reagan planning a war with his Joint Chiefs of Staff, about 2 years later, it came up in the newspapers. Now be mindful, Minister Farrakhan doesn't have some inside scoop into what's going on in the presidents and the military's upper echelons of what's taking place, you know. But God always confirms his servant. It is a confirmation of the revelation. I'm reminded about September 17th. Now, the minister's experience took place on September 17th, 1985. We read about that in the book of Ezekiel. In the King James Version, it talks about an experience that God's servants has where he's taken up in the spirit. And it uses that biblical language. And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, and it goes on to say, and the Spirit of God lifted me up between the earth and the heaven, and brought me in the vision of God to Jerusalem, to the door of the inner gate. So we see where God's servant is taken up in some type of vision-like experience. But what we didn't know, you know, when they have these dates and stuff in the old Bibles, the 5th day and the 4th month and the 20th year, no, I don't know about that stuff. However, some 11, 12 years later, in 1996, there was a new Bible translation that came out. It was the New Living Translation. And in this New Living Translation that came out 11 years after the minister's vision-like experience, these biblical scholars attempted to break down the dates and time. Scientists, scholars, they're looking at scriptures with a scientific mind. So they're looking at the historicity of when these scriptures was given and pointing to, and according to the New Living Translation of that same exact scripture, Ezekiel 8, they stated, then on September 17th, then the Spirit lifted me up into the sky and transported me to Jerusalem in a vision from God. Of all the dates, of all the times, we cannot make this stuff up. God gives you signs and pieces of evidence as to who his servant is. See, again, real data, empirical data, history, you can't argue with that. I'm reminded of this world leader. You may not know his name. His name is Kirsan Ilyumzhinov. Kirsan Ilyumzhinov was the first president of the Buddhist Republic of Kalmykia. It's a mostly Asian population, but it's under the auspices of Russia. He's the first elected democratic president of this Russian country. He's also the president of the World Chess Federation. And this man, President Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, had an experience. No, he was literally abducted. This is a head of state, mind you, a world diplomat on the world stage. While he was in his Moscow apartment, he was with his assistants, and he went to his room, and on the balcony, he said it was one of these wheels. And one of these wheels and the scientists thereof scooped him and took him aboard one of these wheels and showed him different things. He came back, his party was looking for him. He was gone a few hours. When he came back, he told them what happened. Later, he told the Russian government what happened. This became news, but you didn't hear nothing about it, did you? This was in 1997. You probably never even heard of President Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, did you? But he, in a matter of seconds, was scooped away from his Moscow high-rise apartment building by one of these wheels. And he, in his own words, stated that they took me from my apartment and we went aboard their ship. We flew to some kind of star, it seemed. They put a spacesuit on me. They told me many things and showed me around. They wanted to demonstrate that these so-called UFOs do exist. Now, don't you know that when he stated this to the larger Russian government, they were not even concerned whether or not he was telling the truth or not. Their primary concern was whether or not he divulged state secrets to these people on this wheel. And so President Ilyumzhinov stated that they wanted to demonstrate that these UFOs exist. And that took place in 1997. Guess what day? September 17th, 1997. Brothers and sisters, I think we worship a real God that is backing the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, that is represented by the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And if you have as much sense as I know you do, you too would fly, not run, not walk, but fly to that God. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your patience and your time with me. It has been an honor. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
Allahu Akbar.